Isabella Carter believed she knew her husband inside out, until that day when a torrential downpour forced her into the wrong building at the worst conceivable moment. The storm hit Chicago with a wild, unexpected ferocity, instantly transforming the late March afternoon into a dense, impenetrable gray curtain. Isabella Carter, a woman whose professional life was defined by precision and control, gripped the steering wheel of her elegant BMW X3 with attention that mirrored the intensity of the storm. Her eyes, usually sharp and analytical, strained to see the road, which was rapidly dissolving into a rushing urban creek. Hello, I'm Sarah. On this channel, I present to you the courageous, real-life stories of women. Please note, in all the stories you'll hear, names have been changed and visuals have been created to respect privacy. If you'd like to share your story and inspire other women, you can reach us through the channel's About section. I would be honored to be your voice. No, I invite you to listen to the story of a woman who found the strength to stand tall, despite life's challenges. At 34, Isabella had meticulously built a successful career as a high-profile architect. Her striking modern residential designs adorned the most exclusive zip codes of the North Shore and the finest neighborhoods of Chicago. Her schedule was a fortress of back-to-back meetings that rarely left room for improvisation. This Tuesday was supposed to be another demanding day, a predictable and structured march toward her professional goals. At least, that was what she had confidently assumed before the foundation of her world began its catastrophic collapse. The rain drummed against the car with such force that the windshield wipers were hopelessly overwhelmed, even at their highest and most frantic setting. Isabella felt the patter on the panoramic glass roof like a physical assault, an angry, percussive rhythm that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Visibility had dropped to just a few feet. She had just finished an exhausting 3-hour meeting with a notoriously demanding client in a stately apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park. Her only desperate wish was to reach the sanctuary of her home, jump under a hot shower, and erase the memory of the endless petty corrections on a multi-million-dollar villa project that seemed doomed to eternal incompleteness. But the storm was obviously an agent of fate with a completely different script. As the street turned into a blinding, formless sheet of water, Isabella, relying on her years of experience navigating the city's complex one-way streets, made a split-second decision. She turned sharply to the right, leaving the main road and steering into a quieter, tree-lined side street near the Lyric Opera. This area was intimately familiar to her. It was the epicenter of her professional domain. Her gaze fell upon a building she had long admired, a beautifully preserved gray stone building with a freshly restored facade. The ground floor now housed an avant-garde gallery for contemporary art, and on the floor above, a discreet, sophisticated lounge. The place was known as the Gallery and Lounge, the Vantage Point, and Isabella had attended several exclusive openings there over the years. Purely out of instinct and the need for immediate shelter, she parked in the first available spot, held her expensive Italian leather bag over her head in a futile gesture of protection, and ran to the entrance. Her designer heels clattered in a frantic rhythm against the slippery pavement slabs. As she climbed the 3 short steps to the heavy glass door, pushed it open, and stepped inside, a deep sense of relief washed over her, accompanied by a wave of warm, dry air. The atmosphere was rich and complex, a sophisticated blend of scents, the deep, comforting aroma of freshly brewed high-quality espresso, the subtle smell of waxed wood, and a faint exotic note of sandalwood incense. The walls served as a canvas for bold, modern artworks, and the carefully controlled, dimmed lighting cast an intimate golden glow. About 15 guests were scattered throughout the room, some in deep, dark velvet armchairs, others standing near the large windows, silently watching the chaos of the storm outside. Isabella took off her soaked trench coat, its heavy fabric dripping onto the polished floor, and hung it on a discreet coat rack near the entrance. Her carefully styled brown hair was now damp and disheveled, and she ran her fingers through it in a vain attempt to restore some order. It was in this moment, as she turned to walk to the elegant marble bar to order a warming drink, perhaps a strong Earl Grey or a hot chocolate, that the solid ground beneath her feet seemed to sink into an abyss. In the most private and dimly lit corner of the lounge, near a wide window overlooking a small, rain-lashed courtyard, Isabella's eyes registered a scene that her highly logical architect's brain could not process for long, agonizing seconds. In a deep, worn leather armchair sat her husband of 7 years, David Brooks. But the shocking truth was that he was unmistakably not alone. A woman whose blonde, wavy hair fell over David's shoulder was undoubtedly sitting on his lap. This was not accidental proximity or a friendly gesture. She was literally sitting on his thighs, her body leaning closely against his, her arms wrapped intimately around his neck in a possessive embrace that screamed of a deep shared history and left absolutely no room for an innocent interpretation. David's left hand lay open on the woman's lower back. His fingers pressed into the delicate silk of her blouse, while his right hand casually held a half-full glass of an expensive Pinot Noir, an accessory that seemed completely forgotten in the intensity of the moment. The entire world outside the lounge, the raging storm, the city of Chicago, ceased to exist. Time had violently stopped for Isabella. A cold, nauseating wave rolled through her stomach. Her legs began to tremble uncontrollably, a physical manifestation of the seismic shock. Yet she remained rooted to the spot, a statue of disbelief, completely unable to avert her gaze from the scene of her own destruction. There was no mistake possible. No trick of light or shadow could explain this. It was not a woman just sitting next to him, not a platonic hug. It was the unmistakable, primitive body language of two people who had not only crossed all boundaries, but had built a new secret world on the ruins of her marriage. In exactly that devastating moment, David lifted his eyes from the woman's face. The resulting eye contact, bridging the entire length of the lounge, was like a brutal high-voltage shock. Isabella watched with terrifying, crystal-clear clarity the exact moment the color drained from her husband's face, leaving it ashen and sickly. His eyes, usually reserved and calculating, widened with naked horror. His mouth opened slightly, but the sound that should have been a denial or a gasp choked in his throat. His fingers, still holding the wine glass, stiffened, and his whole body froze as if an invisible, malicious force had pressed the emergency stop button on his existence. The blonde woman, absorbed in her own moment, immediately sensed the profound change in David's demeanor. She turned her head with an expression of slight irritation to follow the direction of his paralyzed gaze. "David," she murmured, her voice a deep, husky sound that was nevertheless perfectly audible in the sudden heavy silence of the lounge. She tried again with a hint of impatience in her tone. "David, what's wrong? Where are you looking?" The silence, dense and suffocating, was the only answer. The woman gave his shoulder a small, frustrated nudge to draw his attention back to her. "Is everything okay? Talk to me." When he remained completely frozen, his eyes fixed on the figure at the entrance, the woman finally, reluctantly, followed his gaze to its source. And in that exact second, Isabella felt the second, far more paralyzing blow, a shock that overshadowed the initial discovery. The woman was Chloe Miller. Isabella instinctively recoiled and stumbled 2 steps back. Her back hit the cold, unyielding wall, and she had to press a hand against the plaster to keep from collapsing completely. Chloe, the fiancé of Mark. Mark Anderson, the man who had been her unconditional and unwavering friend since their exhausting days at the Illinois Institute of Technology. The man who had been her rock in every professional crisis, every personal triumph, and every significant milestone of her adult life. What would you have done in Isabella's shoes at that moment? Would you confront them or walk away? Let me know in the comments. Chloe recognized her in the same instant. Her face, flushed with illicit joy moments before, instantly distorted into a grotesque mask of pure horror. She leaped from David's lap as if the leather had suddenly caught fire. It was a movement so violent and abrupt that the wine glass almost fell from his frozen hand. The glass swayed ominously, spilling a few crimson drops onto the expensive beige carpet before David could stabilize it with a final desperate reflex. Isabella did not wait. She did not let out the scream that scratched at her throat. She did not storm across the room to confront them, and she demanded no answers that were already obvious. Instead, she executed a flawless and icy retreat. She turned on her heel and pushed open the heavy glass door with a force that made the frame tremble. The rain was still falling with biblical intensity, but she didn't care. She descended the stone steps, fumbling blindly for the remote to unlock the car with violently shaking hands, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut. Her hands were so unsteady that buckling her seatbelt became a complex task requiring several attempts. Her heart was a frantic, trapped bird, beating so fast and hard it seemed it would break her ribs. Yet Isabella did not cry. Not a single tear escaped her. She started the car. The tires spun briefly on the waterlogged asphalt, and she began to drive without a destination in mind. Her only imperative was distance. She had to be somewhere, anywhere but there. She needed vast, empty space to breathe, to think, to begin the impossible task of processing the catastrophic image that was now burned into her mind. As she navigated through the chaotic and flooded streets of Chicago, feeling the rain as an angry and rhythmic assault against the windshield, Isabella felt a deep internal fracture. Not just the destruction of her marriage, but the annihilation of a fundamental and unquestioned trust in her own judgment and reality, a trust she hadn't even realized was vital until it was brutally ripped away. The infidelity of a husband would have been a crushing blow, but the infidelity of a husband with the fiancé of her oldest and dearest friend was a calculated, double-edged cruelty of a magnitude her rational mind could not grasp. And as Isabella drove aimlessly through the stormy city, a cold, quiet certainty began to take form in the deepest and most resilient layer of her consciousness. This was not the end of the story. This was merely the explosive and agonizing beginning of something much larger, much more painful, and infinitely more complex than she could have ever predicted. Isabella drove on a purely mechanical level. Her consciousness was a frantic, repetitive loop of the scene in the lounge. The landmarks of Chicago, the imposing skyscrapers, the neon signs, the blurred lights of passing cars, were reduced to a damp, meaningless blur outside her windows. The traffic lights changed from red to green, and she obeyed them only out of muscle memory. She registered the colors without meaning. Finally, she stopped and realized she had parked in front of Lincoln Park, a vast green refuge in the city where she and David had often walked on quiet weekend mornings. The park was deserted, its ancient trees whipped violently by wind and rain. Isabella turned off the engine and sat in silence, watching the streams of water trace random and complex patterns on the glass. It was then that the phone resting in the cup holder began its persistent and shrill noise. The discordant sound of the ringtone made her flinch violently. She looked at the illuminated display. David. She let the ringing continue, a harsh intrusion into her fragile silence. It rang until it was swallowed by voicemail. Seconds later, it began again. David, relentless. Isabella leaned forward and pressed the side button to mute the device and put it back in the console. Her gaze returned to the storm. The phone vibrated 5 more times in the next few minutes. Isabella ignored it. She couldn't. She didn't want to hear his voice. She refused to hear the predictable and hasty excuses, the obviously improvised explanations, the desperate and hurriedly constructed lies born of pure panic. She knew the script by heart. She had absorbed it in countless movies, heard the warnings from friends, read the cynical accounts on the internet. She knew exactly which hollow phrases he would use. It's not what you think. I can explain everything. It was a terrible, one-time mistake. But Isabella was not naive. And crucially, she had seen the truth with her own eyes. There was no ambiguity and no room for a plausible alternative narrative. A woman sitting intimately on a man's lap, arms intertwined, bodies pressed together, this image possessed a single undeniable meaning. The phone remained silent for a brief, deceptive time, and Isabella almost allowed herself to believe he had given up. Then the vibration began again. A fast, persistent buzzing. This time it wasn't calls. It was a flood of text messages. One after another, the phone pulsed with successive notifications. Isabella finally picked up the device, unlocked the screen, and checked. 23 unread messages, all from David. She didn't open a single one, but simply stared at the list of notifications rapidly accumulating, watching the desperate, disjointed please roll across the preview screen. Please pick up, I need to talk to you now. It's not what it looks like. I swear to you. Just give me a chance to explain, please. Isabella locked the screen again and rested her forehead against the cold, hard plastic of the steering wheel, closing her eyes against the crushing reality. The rain had softened, transitioning into that fine, persistent drizzle that seems to possess a melancholic and endless duration in Chicago. The monotonous, repetitive sound of drops on the car roof created a hypnotic rhythm, a strange and desolate comfort in its predictability. How much time passed? 5 minutes, 30, an hour? Isabella had lost all sense of time. She only knew that when she finally lifted her head, her neck stiff, and turned the key in the ignition, a decision had solidified in the cold and clear center of her mind. She was not going home. No, she could not cross the threshold of that apartment, sit on that sofa, or lie in that bed. Not tonight, not while the raw and brutal reality of the betrayal was so fresh and cutting. Isabella took her phone, ignored David's frantic messages, and opened a hotel booking app. Her fingers moved with a new icy determination across the screen as she searched for upscale options nearby. She secured a reservation at the Langham, an establishment famous for its elegance and discretion in the city center. She booked a room for 1 night. She didn't second-guess herself, but her resolve hardened to 3 nights. She confirmed the booking and merged the car back into the flow of traffic. The drive to the hotel took a quick 10 minutes. When Isabella entered the grand, silent foyer with her expensive, still damp Italian leather bag and hair slightly sticking to her neck, no one from the staff dared to ask a single question. The receptionist gave her a polished, rehearsed smile, handed her the key card for a premium suite, and wished her a pleasant stay. Isabella nodded with a brief, expressionless gesture and walked to the elevators. The suite was spacious and completely impersonal, decorated in muted, anonymous tones of beige, cream, and slate gray. A massive king-size bed dominated the center of the room, flanked by minimalist lightwood nightstands. The blackout curtains were heavy, designed to completely isolate the outside world. Isabella placed her bag on a velvet armchair near the window, took off her designer shoes, and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Only then, in the absolute and isolating solitude of this anonymous hotel room, did the tears come, tears she had held back with sheer willpower. They were not the hysterical sobs of a broken woman, but a silent, ceaseless stream, the physical manifestation of a heart that had been irrevocably shattered. The following weeks were a relentless cold fog of professional efficiency. Isabella immediately cleared out the apartment she had shared with David and moved into a temporary rental apartment in a modern complex in Chicago's River North. She instituted a strict no-contact rule and communicated with David exclusively through her lawyer, Dr. Eleanor Grant. Dr. Grant was a legend in Chicago legal circles, a formidable and unyielding jurist known for her ruthless and pragmatic approach to high-asset, high-conflict divorces. David, as expected, launched a campaign of desperate attempts to contact her, calls, endless text messages, emails, and even a pathetic attempt to show up at her architectural firm, only to be politely but firmly turned away by her highly qualified assistant. Isabella remained absolutely resolute. She had witnessed the truth and refused to allow him to cloud the matter with further lies or manipulative apologies. The most agonizing conversation, however, was the one with Mark. She met him in a quiet, independent cafe near the Illinois Institute of Technology campus, the exact place where their decades-long friendship had taken root. "I saw them, Mark," she stated in an almost emotionless voice that hid the pain inside her. David and Chloe were intimately together. There is no other way to describe it. Mark's reaction was a devastating cocktail of initial disbelief, followed by an immediate and crushing physical pain. He didn't scream, he didn't deny, he didn't try to argue. He simply slumped in his chair and buried his face in his hands. His entire body language radiated defeat. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice heavy with suppressed tears. "We were 2 months away from the wedding. The invitations were sent out last week." Isabella reached across the small table. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed it gently on his arm. "I am so sorry, Mark. I wish more than anything that I didn't have to be the one to tell you this." They sat in deep, heavy silence for an eternity, two pieces of collateral damage from a shared, brutal, and meticulously planned betrayal. Isabella made the calculated decision to keep the secret of a possible pregnancy to herself for the time being. She knew she had to gather absolutely irrefutable evidence of legal quality before deploying that specific nuclear option. The emotional impact of the affair was enough for the moment. She retained the services of a private investigator, a former police chief named Leo Brady, known for his discretion and thoroughness in investigating financial and medical backgrounds. Brady was undoubtedly expensive, but Isabella viewed the cost as a necessary investment in her future peace of mind and her legal position. She needed to know the full, unvarnished extent of the betrayal. The detective's report arrived 3 weeks later. A thick folder full of bank statements, credit card receipts, and medical records. Isabella sat in Dr. Grant's elegant and minimalist office, her heart beat in a slow, cold, and steady rhythm as she flipped through the pages. The affair, the report confirmed, had lasted over a year. Their secret meeting place was a luxurious short-term rental apartment that David had leased in the chic Lincoln Park district. The payments for it had been cleverly disguised in his expense reports as client entertainment and consulting fees. The receipts meticulously documented extravagant dinners in luxury restaurants, weekend trips to Lake Geneva, and, most damningly, a series of large, unexplained purchases. "Look here, Isabella," Dr. Grant pointed out. Her perfectly manicured finger tapped on a line in a credit card statement. "Tiffany and Company, September 28th, $15,000. Isabella looked down at her simple classic pearl earrings. "A gift from my mother." "I never received jewelry from Tiffany's," she stated. Dr. Grant insisted, then for whom exactly was this purchase? Dr. Grant turned the page with a decisive motion. "And this here, a fertility clinic. Several large payments from your joint account, all declared as prenatal diagnostics for a pregnancy that, according to your own medical records, was demonstrably not yours." Isabella closed the file gently. The burden of proof was overwhelming, a tidal wave of facts. Now it was just a matter of choosing the perfect and most devastating moment for the revelation. The opportunity presented itself a month later at David's 35th birthday celebration. His parents, who fortunately knew nothing of the impending divorce proceedings, had insisted on organizing a grand, opulent party at the Langham, one of the city's most prestigious venues. Isabella had received an invitation and decided with terrifying calm that she would appear. She arrived elegantly late, a striking figure in a long, fitted black dress, her posture absolutely unshakable. The party was in full swing with about 70 guests, a mix of David's most important colleagues, high-profile clients, and close friends. David saw her the moment she entered the hall, and his face instantly turned as pale as white porcelain. He began to move toward her with a desperate, pleading look in his eyes, but Isabella was already striding purposefully toward the small stage where a microphone and a large projection screen were set up for the planned toasts. She took the microphone from the stand, tapped it lightly, and the resulting sharp, amplified sound instantly silenced the murmuring crowd. The whole room went quiet. "Good evening, everyone," Isabella began. Her voice was clear, firm, and echoed perfectly through the room. "I am Isabella Carter, and I am David's wife, or perhaps more accurately, his future ex-wife." A collective, audible gasp of astonishment went through the 70 guests. David froze halfway across the polished floor. "I have been asked to propose a toast to David on the occasion of his 35th birthday," Isabella continued, a slight, almost imperceptibly sad smile on her lips. "And I will comply with that request. I would like to toast to the truth, because the truth, as the old saying goes, will set us free in the end." She stepped to the projector, connected her laptop with practiced ease, and a meticulously organized spreadsheet immediately filled the huge screen. It was a detailed, color-coded breakdown of David's unauthorized, illegal expenses. Here for your enjoyment, you will find a complete list of expenses David has incurred over the last year, she explained, picking up a laser pointer and aiming the red dot at the screen. Expenses that were not dedicated to our shared life, but to his secret parallel life. She highlighted the jewelry purchase with a click. Tiffany & Company, September 28th, $15,000. She touched her simple pearl earrings. I can confirm that I received no jewelry from Tiffany's. So the question remains, for whom was this significant purchase? David was now a ghostly white. He tried to push his way to the stage, but the crowd of guests, now staring completely spellbound at the screen, unconsciously formed an impenetrable human barrier blocking his path. Next, we have the fertility clinic, Isabella continued, her voice maintaining its icy professional firmness. Several substantial payments from our joint account. All for prenatal care for a pregnancy that, I assure you, was not mine. Audible murmurs broke out in the hall. Heads turned frantically between David and Isabella as guests desperately tried to comprehend the unfolding drama. And then Isabella pressed play on another, smaller file. An audio recording began. Chloe's voice, sharp and unmistakable, filled the silent hall. It could be Mark's. It could be David's. Honestly, I don't know. I did the math, and I was with both of them during that critical period. The silence that followed the recording was absolute, a vacuum of sound. 70 people remained frozen in a state of total shock. Isabella finally looked up from the screen and scanned the room. Her eyes bored into Mark's face. He was deathly pale, his eyes fixed wide on the screen, his mouth slightly open in a soundless scream. Next to him was Chloe, who had somehow managed to sneak into the party and was now hiding her face in her hands in a futile attempt to disappear. And finally, Isabella announced, her voice breaking ever so slightly, a brief tremor of the immense pain she carried within. For the few among you who still cling to the hope that this might be some regrettable misunderstanding. She pressed play on the last and most devastating file. The video clip was short, lasting only a few seconds. Isabella had no need to inflict unnecessary trauma on the guests or herself, but it was more than enough. Enough to clearly identify the recognizable hotel room in the luxury apartment. Enough to see two figures, David and Chloe, entwined in an unmistakably compromising position. Isabella paused the video and turned off the projector with a final decisive movement. The room remained in a state of profound and absolute silence. It was the kind of silence that occurs when dozens of people simultaneously process a single devastating emotional bomb. That was a bold move from Isabella. Do you think she went too far, or was it the perfect way to reveal the truth? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Isabella quietly placed the microphone back in its stand, descended the short steps of the stage, and began walking toward the main exit with a slow, deliberate dignity. As she passed Mark, she paused for a tiny moment, placed her hand gently on his frozen arm, and whispered with a voice full of sincere regret, "I am truly sorry, Mark. You deserve to know the truth." Mark gave no answer. He simply stared continuously at Chloe, his expression a terrifying mask of pure betrayal such as Isabella had never seen before. Isabella continued on her path. She walked past David, who remained petrified, a statue of shame in the middle of the hall, all eyes on him, no one with the courage or words to intervene. She walked past her own mother, who was weeping quietly into a handkerchief. She walked past David's parents, who seemed to have aged a decade in the span of 10 minutes. Then she stepped out through the massive, ornate main doors of the Langham into the cool, cleansing night air. Her car was waiting exactly where she had parked it. Isabella slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away. She did not look in the rearview mirror a single time. What chaos, accusations, or consequences were now erupting in that hall was no longer her burden. She had delivered the truth, and the truth, as it always does, had unleashed its own devastating and undeniable power. In the days that immediately followed, The consequences of Isabella's public revelation unfolded with frightening speed and finality, exactly as she had coldly predicted. It was fast, brutal, and completely irreversible. Mark called Isabella early Sunday morning. His voice was rough and brittle, the sound of a man who hadn't slept and probably couldn't. "I need to talk to you," he said, without any form of greeting. "I know," Isabella replied with her own calm and firm voice. "Where would you like to meet?" They agreed on a secluded, quiet cafe on the edge of the Chicago Botanic Garden, far away from the prying eyes of high society. When Isabella arrived, Mark was already sitting there at a table in the corner, a half-full cup of cold coffee before him. He looked completely at the end of his rope. Deep, dark circles underscored his eyes. His hair was disheveled, and his clothes looked as if he had pulled them on without thought. Isabella slid into the seat opposite him and maintained a respectful silence. "It's over," Mark said finally. The words were heavy and final. "Last night I gave her back the ring, canceled the wedding venue, and sent a message to all guests that the wedding is off." "I am so sorry," Mark, Isabella said. "Don't say that," he countered, lifting his head to meet her gaze for the first time. "You did the right thing. If you hadn't done what you did yesterday, I would have married her. I would have committed to spending the rest of my life believing a lie." Still, Isabella persisted gently. "I know this pain is immeasurable." Mark let out a short, bitter, and humorless laugh. "Immeasurable, Isabella. I invested 10 years of my life in this woman. 10 years believing I knew the person sleeping next to me. And last night, I found out in front of 70 people that I knew absolutely nothing, that the woman I wanted to marry not only cheated on me with my best friend's husband, but might also be expecting a child by him." Isabella let the deep silence between them work. "Will you demand a paternity test?" she asked in an even tone. "No," Mark replied, shaking his head resolutely. "That's not my problem. If it turns out the child is mine, Chloe can contact me if she has irrefutable proof. Until that moment, I want absolutely no connection to her or her life." Finally, he picked up the coffee cup, took a large gulp, and grimaced. It was ice cold, and he asked, returning the question, "How are you really doing with this?" Isabella paused and considered her answer with the precision of an architect. "Strangely, I feel a deep sense of peace. I think it's because I had weeks to process the truth, to prepare myself. I possess the knowledge. The whole brutal reality hit you all at once. That's why you waited until the party to tell me, to make sure you had all the evidence," Mark said. "Yes," she confirmed. "I couldn't come to you with mere suspicion. You would have defended yourself, naturally, and Chloe could have easily invented a counter-narrative. I needed evidence that was both legally and emotionally irrefutable." Mark nodded slowly, accepting her logic. "And David? What are the consequences for him?" he asked. "Divorce," Isabella explained simply. "The papers are already being finalized. And as for the professional consequences..." Isabella paused, a flash of cold satisfaction in her eyes. "I don't have to lift a finger anymore." The guest list of that party included his CEO, his most important clients, and his direct colleagues. His reputation in this city is already irretrievably destroyed. And so it was. Isabella learned through the efficient and whispering network of mutual friends that David had been placed on indefinite leave from his post at his high-profile technology startup. Although officially a leave of absence, everyone understood what it was: a polite termination by the company. A technology company that prided itself on its progressive and ethical image could not afford to employ an executive publicly involved in such a dirty social scandal. Chloe also faced immediate and harsh consequences. Her jewelry boutique, which depended almost entirely on the delicate ecosystem of social networks and recommendations from the Chicago elite, saw its sales plunge into an abyss. Clients canceled custom orders. Important contracts were abruptly withdrawn. In less than 2 weeks, Chloe was forced to close the shop, hanging a short, simple note on the locked glass door, temporarily closed due to unforeseen personal circumstances. Isabella felt no wave of triumphant satisfaction at this news. Her actions had never been motivated by revenge, but she also felt no pity. Actions have consequences, and adults, she thought with final coldness, must live with the decisions they make. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly fast and uncontested given the explosive circumstances. David offered no resistance. He did not try to fight for the division of assets. He signed every document Dr. Eleanor Grant placed before him with the silent and defeated resignation of a man who knew he had absolutely no legal or moral ground to stand on. Isabella retained ownership of the luxurious apartment. She was financially capable of keeping it on her own and refused to give David even a fraction of the space he had so thoroughly desecrated. David was left with a small portion of his savings, his car, and full responsibility for the mountain of credit card debt he had accumulated during his affair. As for the potential paternity, a clear agreement was reached. If a DNA test confirmed that David was the father of Chloe's child, he would assume full financial responsibility according to the law. But Isabella would have no connection or contact with the situation whatsoever. 3 months later, the final divorce decree was signed and filed. Isabella Carter was officially and legally free. She did not celebrate the occasion. She simply signed the last papers on a quiet Thursday afternoon in Dr. Grant's office and then returned immediately to her studio. She treated the monumental event as nothing more than a completed administrative task, because in the cold and hard light of her new reality, that is exactly what it was. Isabella's life began its slow and deliberate return to a new normality. It was not the normality of her past, that reality was irrevocably shattered, but a new, carefully constructed rhythm that was in many ways healthier and more authentic. She threw herself into her work with a new, almost grim intensity. She began accepting challenging and high-profile projects she might have previously declined. She traveled extensively, giving lectures at major architectural congresses in New York, San Francisco, and Boston. She began teaching as a guest lecturer at renowned universities about the critical importance of sustainable design and the preservation of historical structures. And slowly, with the cautious pace of a deep thaw, Isabella began to allow herself to truly live again. Not just to survive in the rubble, but to embrace a vibrant and future-oriented existence. She adopted a dog from a shelter, a magnificent 7-year-old German shepherd named Max, who had been abandoned by his previous owner and had the wary, mistrustful look of an animal that had learned the world could be cruel and unpredictable. Isabella and Max formed an instant and deep bond. Both had been betrayed. Both were in the slow and meticulous process of rebuilding trust, one small, tentative step at a time. Isabella also committed to regular therapy sessions with a highly recommended counselor, Dr. Charlotte Vance. She did this not because she was on the verge of a breakdown, but because she was determined to process the trauma in the healthiest way possible. She wanted to ensure she carried no unresolved emotional baggage into the future she was currently building. 10 months after finalizing her divorce at a major international architecture summit in New York, an event attracting architects, thought leaders, and urban planners from all over the country, Isabella met Lucas. She was sitting in a session on sustainable innovations in large-scale redevelopment projects, busily taking notes, when the man next to her leaned over and made a witty and astute comment about the presentation. They got into a conversation. Initially, the exchange was purely professional. Then it drifted to the complexities of urban life, returned to their shared passion for architecture, and finally focused on the deeper and more personal aspects of life. Lucas Bennett was also an architect based in New York, specializing in bespoke luxury residential projects. He was 42 years old, with a kind, open face and 2 sons from a previous marriage that had ended amicably 3 years prior. He possessed an easy and genuine smile that had the power to completely light up his features. There were no sudden dramatic sparks or an immediate overwhelming attraction. Instead, there was a quiet and deep connection, a natural ease in their conversation. There was the deeply soothing feeling of talking to someone who truly listened to her words and genuinely valued her perspective. They exchanged contact details, began a steady exchange of text messages, and then followed the long late-night phone calls. Lucas began inventing increasingly flimsy excuses to visit Chicago more often. Isabella, in turn, began taking on new projects in New York that required her to be there more frequently. When they finally shared their first kiss 4 months after that initial meeting at the Congress, it happened during a quiet evening walk along the Chicago River, while the setting sun painted the city's vast horizon in impressive shades of orange, fire red, and deep violet. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, a mutual exploration, but it felt absolutely and profoundly right. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Isabella?" Lucas asked afterward, holding her hands gently and studying her face with genuine concern. "I know you've been through a lot. I don't want to push you into anything." "I am ready," Isabella replied with a firm and honest voice. "Not because I have forgotten what happened, but because I have learned that the events of the past do not define my future." And she meant it. She truly meant it. 2 years after the devastating scandal at the birthday party, Isabella sat in a comfortable chair in a gynecologist's office, her hands firmly in Lucas's hands. Both stared intently at the ultrasound monitor. "Congratulations," the doctor announced with a warm, professional smile. "You are expecting a healthy girl." Isabella felt the familiar and warm rise of tears running down her face, but they were good tears. Tears of pure and absolute joy and gratitude. Lucas squeezed her hand, his own eyes shining bright with deep emotion. They had married 6 months earlier in a small and deeply intimate ceremony in the Chicago Botanic Garden, attended only by their closest family members and a few selected friends. Mark was there, standing proudly by Isabella's side as her man of honor. He had finally recovered from Chloe's betrayal. He was now seeing someone new, a gentle and grounded yoga instructor he had met through mutual friends. A woman whose kind and honest spirit was exactly the balm his wounded heart needed. Lucas had moved permanently to Chicago after the wedding and had opened a successful branch of his architectural firm in the city. Together they bought a house, not another sterile apartment, but a real, spacious house with a large, mature garden in the coveted residential area of Winnetka. Ironically, it was only a few miles from where Isabella had once lived with David. But this house was fundamentally different. It was theirs. It was a home built not on precision, but on the solid foundation of truth, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment. As Isabella entered her 3rd trimester, she finally received the last definitive update about Chloe and the baby. Mark mentioned it casually over coffee, noting that Chloe had given birth to a girl 3 months prior. The paternity test had confirmed without a doubt that David was the father. He was paying the mandatory child support, but had decided to forego any custody or regular visitation rights. A decision that, as Mark had heard, lay entirely with David. Chloe, Mark added, had moved away and settled in a smaller, quieter village in rural Wisconsin, far away from the social memory of the Chicago scandal. There she had opened a new small arts and crafts shop and was trying to rebuild her life far from the rubble she had created. Isabella absorbed this information with a complex mix of emotions. A small part of her felt a distant pang of sadness, not for Chloe or David, but for the innocent child born into such a chaotic situation. A larger and more dominant part of her felt a quiet sense that justice had taken its natural course in its slow and inevitable way. People had to face the consequences of their actions. Life for everyone involved had moved on. It's amazing how life can turn around. Have you ever had a painful ending lead to a beautiful new beginning? Share your story if you feel comfortable. Have you ever thought about contacting him? Lucas asked one evening as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively on Isabella's large, round belly. Now that you are both about to be parents. Isabella thought about the question for a long moment. "No," she stated finally. "And I won't. What happens in his life is no longer my business, Lucas. He made his choices. I made mine, and now our paths are permanently and completely separated." Lucas leaned forward and tenderly kissed her forehead. "You are a much better person with much more class than I would be in this situation." "I am not better," Isabella corrected him gently. "I just learned that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison in the foolish hope that the other person will die from it. David deserves no more space in my mind or in my heart. When Isabella and Lucas's daughter finally arrived on a clear and crisp November morning, while the bright sun shone through the windows of the maternity ward at the Northwestern Medicine Prentice Women's Hospital, Isabella held the perfect little baby in her arms and was overwhelmed by a feeling she hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not gratitude for the betrayal, never that, but deep gratitude for the difficult and painful path the betrayal had ultimately forced her to take. Because if David hadn't cheated on her, if Isabella hadn't discovered the truth, if she hadn't found the courage to end the marriage and meticulously rebuild her life, she would never have met Lucas, would never be holding this precious baby, and would never have found this beautiful and authentic life. Her daughter was named Grace, and as Isabella looked at the baby's perfect little face and felt the strong presence of Lucas by her side, as well as Max, her faithful shepherd faithfully at the foot of the hospital bed, she grasped a fundamental truth that changed her life. True happiness does not come from never being hurt. It comes from possessing the inner strength to rise again when you are. It comes from the unwavering refusal to allow another's weakness or betrayal to define one's own worth. It comes from choosing the difficult truth over comfortable denial, even when that truth is brutal. And most importantly, it comes from the quiet patience and deep trust that after the most violent storm, the sun will always shine again. Isabella kissed Grace's forehead with infinite tenderness. "Welcome to the world, little one," she whispered, her voice heavy with emotion, "and welcome to the life I built for us. An honest life, a true life." And in this one perfect moment, surrounded by her new and genuine family, with the future stretching out before her like a blank page waiting to be filled, Isabella finally let the past go completely. Not with lingering anger, not with corrosive bitterness, but with the calm and unshakable dignity of a woman who had looked truth directly in the eye. She had refused to back down and had emerged on the other side, infinitely stronger, immeasurably wiser, and deeply, beautifully free. We've listened to this strong woman's story, together. I'm grateful to her for sharing her courage with us. So, what do you think? If you were in her place, could you make these difficult decisions? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I read each one and try to respond. Thank you for being here with me. See you in the next story.
Hello everyone. Before this video begins, I need to sit down with you for a minute and be completely honest about what's going on. This isn't the message I wanted to give, but it's the one I have to give. This will be the last video I'm able to post until February. I really wish it wasn't the case, but right now, I just don't have another option. YouTube has removed monetization from Revenge Alley, and when that happens, the entire production process falls apart. I'll only be able to reapply for monetization in March, unless they somehow change their minds, which is very unlikely. These stories take real time, real effort, and real work to make. Without monetization, I simply can't keep releasing them the way I've been doing for the past year. I need to pause, regroup, and rebuild everything behind the scenes so this channel can survive long term. And I want to be very straightforward with you. I'm sad. I'm frustrated. And honestly, it feels incredibly unfair. I've followed every guideline. I've created only original stories. I've always been careful with every detail, because I respect this platform, and I respect every single person who chooses to watch these videos. Meanwhile, I see channels every day posting recycled clips, inappropriate content, low-effort mass-produced material, and they stay monetized without a problem. Watching this channel, built honestly, built from scratch, get hit like this, it hits hard. It really does. It feels like doing things the right way ended up counting against me. So as much as it pains me to step back for a while, I need this pause. I need time to reorganize the workflow, adjust the structure, and make sure that when Revenge Alley comes back, it comes back stronger, cleaner, and sustainable for the long run. I'm not disappearing. I'm not giving up. The plan is to return in February and continue building this project the way I always intended. Now, if you're wondering how you can support the channel during this break, it's actually very simple. Just stay subscribed and turn notifications on. That's the best way to make sure you're here the moment new videos return in February. There's one more thing you need to know. Over the next days and weeks, I'll be removing the videos from the channel as part of this reset. So if there are stories you want to rewatch, now is the moment to do it. Once they're gone, they're going to stay offline until the full rebuild is complete. Thank you, truly, for being here. Thank you for your support, your comments, your time, and your trust. This audience has treated the channel with honesty and respect, and that means more than you'll ever know. It's the reason I'm committed to bringing Revenge Alley back the right way. For now, enjoy the final video of our channel. And again, thank you for watching Revenge Alley. Happy birthday to my soon-to-be ex-wife, Derek announced, sliding a manila envelope across the table toward me while his friends erupted into laughter. The restaurant went quiet around us, forks suspended mid-air, conversations dying on strangers' lips. I stared at the envelope, my 37th birthday cake sitting untouched between us, its candles still waiting to be lit. My name is Laura, and I had spent the last 8 years married to a man who thought cruelty was comedy. We lived in Portland, Oregon, in a house I had helped pay for with my salary as a logistics coordinator at Thornmere Solutions. I had met Derek at a friend's barbecue when I was 28, drawn to his easy charm and the way he made everyone around him laugh. What I did not realize then was that eventually, I would become the punchline. "Open it! Open it!" his friend Tyler chanted, slapping the table. Beside him, Greg was already recording on his phone, capturing what they clearly expected to be my humiliation. Derek sat back in his chair with that smug smile I had grown to despise, the one that said he had won something I had not even known we were competing for. I picked up the envelope with steady hands, a calmness settling over me that surprised even myself. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out, with little sticky arrows pointing to where I needed to sign. Derek had even highlighted the sections in yellow, as if I might miss them otherwise. "Took me weeks to plan this," Derek said proudly. "Figured your birthday was the perfect time. You know, out with the old, in with the new." His friends howled with laughter again, and I noticed a few other diners looking at us with a mixture of horror and fascination. But what Derek did not notice, what none of his idiot friends seemed to register, was the man sitting at the end of our table. Julian had been quiet all evening, nursing a glass of wine and watching the scene unfold, with an expression I could not quite read. He was Derek's cousin on his mother's side, visiting from Seattle where he worked as an architect. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of quiet intelligence that made you want to lean in when he spoke. Everything Derek pretended to be, Julian actually was. As the laughter continued around me, Julian leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sign them," he said. "Sign them, and then I can finally have my chance with you." I turned to look at him, really look at him, and something in his eyes made my heart skip. This was not a joke. This was not another cruel punchline. This was an offer, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. The truth was, I had been drowning for years. I just had not admitted it to myself until that moment, sitting in that restaurant with divorce papers in my hands and a room full of people waiting to watch me fall apart. Derek and I had started out like any other couple. There were flowers and romantic dinners and whispered promises about the future. He was charming when he wanted to be, the kind of man who could light up a room with his presence. But somewhere along the way, his charm curdled into something darker. The jokes at my expense started small, little comments about my cooking or my weight that he would brush off as teasing. But they grew sharper over time, more pointed, until I found myself dreading social gatherings because I never knew when I would become the target. I had given up so much for this marriage. My friends had slowly drifted away, tired of being caught in the crossfire of Derek's cutting remarks. My relationship with my own family had become strained because Derek always found a reason to skip holiday gatherings or complained endlessly when we did attend. I had stopped pursuing the promotion at work because Derek insisted my job was just a backup plan and that I should focus more on keeping the house in order. The worst part was how long it took me to see it. When you are in the middle of it, when the manipulation is gradual and wrapped in just enough affection to keep you hooked, you do not realize you are being dismantled piece by piece. I had convinced myself that every married couple had their problems, that Derek's behavior was just his way of coping with stress, that things would get better if I just tried harder, loved more, gave more of myself. But things never got better. They only got worse. I had started noticing Julian about 2 years ago, at a family reunion Derek had reluctantly attended. While Derek spent the afternoon complaining about the food and making snide comments about his relatives, Julian had sat with me on the porch and actually listened when I talked. He asked questions about my job, my interests, my dreams. He looked at me like I was a person worth knowing, not a prop in someone else's comedy routine. After that reunion, I found myself thinking about Julian more often than I should have. Not in any inappropriate way, I told myself. I was married, after all. But there was something about the way he treated me that highlighted just how poorly Derek did. Julian remembered details from our conversations months later. He sent me articles about topics I had mentioned in passing. When we were at family gatherings, he always made sure I had a drink and someone to talk to. I had told myself it was nothing, that Julian was just a kind person. But sitting in that restaurant with his words echoing in my ears, I wondered if I had been blind to something that had been building all along. Derek was still laughing with his friends, completely unaware that his carefully planned humiliation was about to backfire in spectacular fashion. I looked down at the divorce papers again, at the highlighted signature lines and the sticky arrows pointing to my future. For 8 years, I had bent myself into shapes trying to fit into Derek's version of what a wife should be. I had swallowed my pride, silenced my opinions, and shrunk myself down until I barely recognized the woman I had become. And for what? For a man who thought serving me divorce papers on my birthday in front of his friends was hilarious. "You know what, Derek?" I said, my voice cutting through the laughter. "You are absolutely right. This is the perfect birthday gift." I pulled a pen from my purse, the same pen I used to sign contracts at work, to authorize shipments worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. With deliberate calm, I flipped to the first signature page and signed my name, then the second, then the third. The laughter around the table began to fade, replaced by confused silence. Derek's smug expression flickered, uncertainty creeping in at the edges. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Exactly what you asked me to do," I replied, not looking up as I signed the final page. "I am signing your divorce papers. Happy birthday to me." I slid the papers back across the table to him, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for so long suddenly lifted, and I could breathe again. Really breathe. "Wait, no, that is not..." Derek sputtered, his face reddening. "You were supposed to cry. You were supposed to beg me to reconsider." "Why would I beg to stay married to someone who treats me like this?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You just handed me my freedom, Derek, on a silver platter, with witnesses." Tyler and Greg exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was clearly not how the evening was supposed to go. Greg had even stopped recording, the phone now hanging limply in his hand. I stood up from the table, gathering my purse and the birthday card my sister had sent that I had not yet had a chance to open. Julian rose with me, his movement so natural it seemed choreographed. "Where do you think you are going?" Derek demanded, finally finding his voice. "Home," I said simply. "To start packing your things." "My things? That is my house. Actually, it is in my name. I bought it before we got married, remember? You never wanted to be added to the deed because you said paperwork was boring." I smiled, and it felt like the first real smile I had worn in years. "Thank you for that, by the way." Julian placed his hand gently on the small of my back as we walked toward the exit. Behind us, I could hear Derek's voice rising in pitch, demanding that someone explain what had just happened, insisting this was not funny anymore. No, it was not funny. But for the first time in 8 years, I was the one walking away laughing. The cool Portland air hit my face as we stepped outside, and I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the scent of rain-washed streets and pine trees. Julian walked beside me in comfortable silence, not rushing to fill the space with empty words. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he finally asked as we reached the parking lot. "The house is mine," I reminded him. "Derek can find a hotel, or sleep in his car. I honestly do not care anymore." Julian nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Would you like some company? Just to make sure he does not cause a scene when he gets back." I studied his face in the glow of the streetlights, searching for any hint of an ulterior motive. But all I found was genuine concern and something else. Something warm that made my stomach flutter. "I would like that," I said. We took separate cars to my house, a modest 2-story Craftsman I had purchased with my savings before Derek ever entered my life. I had always loved this house, with its wide front porch and the maple tree in the backyard that turned brilliant orange every fall. Somehow during my marriage, I had forgotten that it was mine, that I had earned it, paid for it, made it a home before Derek decided to move in and claim it as his own. Inside, Julian helped me gather Derek's things into boxes. His clothes from the closet, his sports memorabilia from the garage, his collection of expensive whiskey that he bought with money we could not really afford. With each item I packed, I felt another chain fall away. "Can I ask you something?" Julian said as we worked. "Of course." "What you said back at the restaurant about what Derek did, has it always been like that?" I paused, a handful of Derek's socks suspended over a cardboard box. "Not always. At least it did not feel that way at first. The cruel jokes started small, you know? Little comments here and there. By the time I realized how bad it had gotten, I was so deep in it, I did not know how to get out." Julian set down the box he was holding and turned to face me. "I noticed," he said quietly. "At family gatherings, the way he talked to you, the way you would shrink whenever he spoke. I wanted to say something so many times, but I did not know if it was my place." "Why did you say what you said tonight?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since the restaurant. "About having your chance?" He met my eyes, unflinching. "Because I have been in love with you for 2 years, and watching you suffer in that marriage was torture. I never said anything because you were married, and I respect that. But tonight, when he handed you those papers and expected you to fall apart, I saw my opening. I saw a chance to finally tell you the truth." My heart was pounding so hard I was certain he could hear it. "Julian, you do not have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I am not asking for anything right now. I just needed you to know that there is someone who sees you, really sees you, and thinks you deserve so much better than what Derek gave you." Before I could respond, headlights swept across the window. Derek was home. The front door slammed open with enough force to rattle the pictures on the wall. Derek stormed in, his face twisted with rage, Tyler and Greg trailing behind him like loyal dogs. "What the hell is going on here?" Derek shouted, his eyes darting between me, Julian, and the boxes stacked in the living room. "Julian, what are you doing in my house?" "It is not your house," I said calmly. "We already established that at the restaurant. Your things are packed. I suggest you take them and leave." Derek's face went from red to purple. "You cannot just kick me out. We have been married for 8 years. "Exactly," I replied. 8 years of being your punching bag, your joke, your excuse to feel superior. You wanted a divorce, Derek. You got one. Now leave." Tyler stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Hey, you cannot talk to him like that. Derek is our boy." Julian moved to stand beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. "I think you should listen to her. This is her property, and she has asked you to leave." Derek's eyes narrowed as he looked at his cousin. Really looked at him, standing close to me, protective and calm. I watched the realization dawn on his face, the understanding that something was happening here that he had not anticipated. "Wait a minute," Derek said slowly, his voice dripping with accusation. "Are you two... have you been..." He could not even finish the sentence, choking on his own jealousy. "I have never cheated on you," I said flatly. "Unlike some people." I had found the credit card receipt 6 months ago. Hotels in Vancouver, expensive dinners, jewelry purchases that never made their way to me. I had confronted him, and he had laughed it off, called me paranoid, made me feel crazy for even asking. Derek's face went pale. "That is, I never..." "Her name is Brittany, right? The receptionist at your gym," I continued, watching him squirm. "Did you think I would not find out eventually? Or did you just think I was too stupid to notice?" The room fell silent. Even Tyler and Greg looked uncomfortable, shuffling their feet and avoiding eye contact. "Here is what is going to happen," I said, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. "You are going to take your boxes and leave. The divorce papers are signed, which means this process can move forward quickly. You will get nothing from me, Derek. Not this house, not my savings, not another moment of my time. Because unlike you, I actually paid attention during our marriage. I know about the money you hid, the debts you racked up in both our names, the lies you told to make yourself look good." Derek opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "And if you try to fight me on any of this, I have documentation. Every cruel text message, every suspicious charge, every time you humiliated me in public. I have been keeping records for 2 years, Derek, just in case I ever got the courage to leave. Turns out, you gave me that courage tonight." I gestured toward the boxes. "Now take your things and get out of my house." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, Derek reached for the nearest box. His friends grabbed the others, and without another word, they filed out the door. I stood at the window and watched them load everything into Derek's truck. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he looked back at the house one last time, his expression a mixture of disbelief and defeat. Then he drove away, and I felt something inside me release, like a knot that had been tied for 8 years finally coming undone. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of lawyers, paperwork, and new beginnings. My attorney was thrilled with the documentation I had compiled, calling it one of the most thorough cases she had ever seen. Derek tried to fight for half the house, half my savings, even half my retirement fund. But with the evidence of his infidelity and financial misconduct, he did not have a leg to stand on. Julian stayed in Portland longer than he had originally planned. At first, he said it was to make sure I was okay, to help with the transition. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that neither of us wanted him to leave. We took things slowly, both of us aware of the complicated circumstances. There were dinners that lasted for hours, long walks through the neighborhood, late-night conversations about everything and nothing. Julian was patient in a way Derek never had been, attentive in ways I had forgotten a person could be. "I do not want to rush you," he told me one evening as we sat on my front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You have been through so much. I am not going anywhere." "I know," I said, reaching for his hand. "That is exactly why I trust you." The divorce was finalized 3 months after that birthday dinner. I got to keep the house, my retirement, and most of our joint savings. Derek was ordered to pay back the debts he had secretly accumulated, which meant he would be digging himself out of a financial hole for years to come. But the real vindication came a few weeks later, at a family gathering I almost did not attend. Julian's mother was celebrating her 60th birthday, and the entire extended family would be there, including Derek. I hesitated when Julian first mentioned it, unsure if I was ready to face my ex-husband in a social setting. "You do not have to come if you are not comfortable," Julian said. "I understand completely." But something in me wanted to go, not out of pettiness or a desire for revenge, but because I refused to let Derek's existence dictate my choices anymore. I had spent 8 years arranging my life around his moods and preferences. That was over now. "I will be there," I told Julian, "and I want to walk in holding your hand." The look on his face, pure joy mixed with disbelief, made everything worth it. The party was held at a beautiful restaurant overlooking the Willamette River. I wore a dress I never would have worn during my marriage, something that made me feel confident and beautiful. Julian looked at me like I was the only person in the room. We walked in together, his hand warm and steady in mine. The room was already full of family members, conversations buzzing, laughter floating through the air. And there, in the corner by the bar, stood Derek. He saw us at the exact moment we saw him. His drink froze halfway to his lips, his face going through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally, something that looked a lot like devastation. Julian squeezed my hand gently. "You okay?" I smiled, genuinely and freely. "I am perfect." Derek could not stop staring. Every few minutes, I would catch him looking over at Julian and me, his expression growing more sour by the second. He was alone at the party, I noticed. Brittany from the gym was nowhere to be seen, and his usual entourage of Tyler and Greg had apparently not made the family invitation list. Halfway through the evening, he finally approached us. Julian's grip on my hand tightened slightly, but he did not move to shield me. He knew I could handle this myself. "So this is what you have been doing," Derek said, his words slightly slurred. He had clearly been making frequent trips to the bar. "Running off with my cousin the minute our marriage ended." "You ended our marriage, Derek?" I reminded him calmly. "On my birthday, in front of witnesses, remember?" His face flushed. "That was supposed to be... I did not think you would actually... You did not think I would actually leave?" I finished for him. "That is the problem, Derek. You never thought about what I might do, what I might want, what I might feel. You were so busy being the center of your own universe that you forgot other people exist." Several family members had noticed the exchange and were watching with undisguised interest. Derek shifted uncomfortably under their gazes. "You know what the funny thing is?" I continued, keeping my voice pleasant. "You handed me those divorce papers thinking you were humiliating me. But you actually gave me the best gift anyone ever has. You gave me a way out, Derek, and I took it." Julian stepped forward then, his voice quiet but firm. "I think you should walk away now, cousin. You have caused enough damage." For a moment I thought Derek might argue. But looking around at the family members watching, at the cousins and aunts and uncles who had heard the story of what he did at my birthday dinner, he seemed to deflate. Without another word, he turned and walked away. In the months that followed, I heard through the family grapevine that Derek's life had taken a significant downturn. Brittany had left him after discovering he was broke, the debts from the divorce settlement draining whatever savings he had. He lost his job at the sales firm after showing up drunk one too many times, and last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment across town, estranged from most of his family who had finally seen him for who he really was. Meanwhile, Julian and I built something beautiful together. He transferred his architecture work to Portland, and we spent our evenings renovating my little craftsman house, making it ours. He planted a garden in the backyard, and I learned that I actually loved cooking when someone appreciated the effort. We adopted a rescue dog named Maple, who slept at the foot of our bed and barked at squirrels. On the 1-year anniversary of that disastrous birthday dinner, Julian took me back to the same restaurant. I was hesitant at first, the memories still sharp, but he insisted, and I trusted him. We sat at a different table this time, one by the window overlooking the city lights. When the waiter brought out a small box instead of dessert, my heart nearly stopped. 1 year ago, Julian said, taking my hands in his, someone tried to use this place to break you. I wanted to reclaim it, to turn it into something beautiful. He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. Laura, you are the strongest, most resilient person I have ever known. I have loved you since the moment I really got to know you. And I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget how extraordinary you are. Will you marry me? I said yes through tears of joy. And as he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me here. A birthday ruined had become a life reclaimed. A marriage ended had made room for a love I never knew was possible. Looking back now, I realized that the best revenge was not watching Derek suffer, though there was a certain satisfaction in knowing he faced the consequences of his cruelty. No, the best revenge was simply living well, building a life filled with genuine love and respect, and finally understanding my own worth. Derek had thought he was delivering a devastating blow that night at the restaurant. Instead, he had unknowingly handed me the key to my freedom, and I had used it to unlock a future more beautiful than anything I could have imagined.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment in the story has touched your heart, brought you some reflection, some emotion, and hope. Thank you for taking the time to experience it with us, and hope that each next story will always accompany you on your life journey.